This is Fresh Thinking with Optiro, the podcast where we share ideas from the world of mining and how they apply in industry today. This is episode 17, and it's also part 4 of a 4-part series on due diligence. In the first 3 parts of this series, we've covered off what is due diligence, what's in the scope of a DD, how you go about it, what's in the process, and finally, today, we're talking about buying and selling, tips and traps in due diligence. I'm joined by Mike Warren, the MD of Optiro, and we're going to be hearing about some of the things he's learned over the years doing DDs and what's gone well and what hasn't gone so well. So Mark, first, let's just say I'm a buyer. I'm looking at buying a mineral asset. What should I hope to get out of my DD?
Hi, Adam. There's a number of things that I'd love to share on this, but we'll have to limit this to a reasonable length episode. But let's just touch on a few of the things. The first thing I'd say to people before they jump into doing a DD is consider when it's right to actually conduct the DD as part of the negotiation process. Surprisingly, we've been involved in a number of DDs where the purchase has failed, and it hasn't been due to any technical or legal or commercial legal problem, I should say, or financial problem with the company, but it's been that the DD was effectively started prematurely. And the two main reasons that is the case is price and management issues. Price being that the buyer and seller couldn't agree on a price, and nothing in the DD was going to change that. So a bit more work needs to be done in the negotiation phase and getting the term sheet sorted out such that you have some comfort in the price. And you can make that contingent on what you learn out of the DD, but there's nothing worse than going through a whole process and spending a lot of your company's money and not getting anywhere just because you were never going to get to the point of a valid price. You know, at the end of the day, if it's a company that's trading, you're going to be paying a premium to the market price of some nature. Otherwise, why would the shareholders want to do the deal? That needs to be resolved, and the company needs to get that right. The second issue is that, and this particularly more applies to mergers, we've been involved in ones where the thorny issue, and I say it's a thorny issue because it seems to come up, and I know it's sensitive, and that is that there's only room for one person at the top or one management team. If you're merging, you end up with one board, you end up with one managing director, you end up with one CFO, and so on. Quite often the people that are involved in negotiating the deal are those very people on both sides of the table, and only one of them gets the gig in the final role. And, we've all got egos, and sometimes they get in the way, and we can't agree on who should be the person running it. You might as well get that resolved and have that honest conversation before you jump into the DD. So the next item, Adam, I would suggest to listeners is the point that I've raised a few times in the earlier episodes, and that is this staged approach. Consider a light touch before embarking on too much detail. Apply some critical thinking at is what you want to get out of the DD, and discuss that with the people you want to undertake it well before doing it. In a staged approach, for instance, you can learn a lot and then either go back to the seller and say, look, this isn't for us, or alternately, hopefully, wow, this is looking really great, we want to proceed to the next stage. Things like just having a quick look at the geology. At the end of the day, you're buying a mineral asset, and in my mind, geology is king. Everything follows from what's in the ground. If the quality of the asset of what's in the ground's not there, the rest of it is never always going to be hard yards. So you can have a quick look at that even before, for instance, getting access to a data room. You can potentially have a look at the public information on what's the resource looks like. You can get that thrown into some 3D modelling software, get some expertise put together, and have a view as to whether it's really going to fit your criteria. And then even once you're into the side of the data room, you can likewise just have a bit of a look at that before undertaking too much of the more detailed issues. So that's a second thing that I think is a really good way of going about making it work well for you. Thirdly, Adam, I've talked about in previously episodes about the confidentiality agreement and the data room access mentioned, and about getting those things sorted out. It's really important to sort them out if you want things to go smoothly. Particularly if you've got external people involved, and there's a payroll involved in the people sitting around doing the DD. You don't want to be wasting your company's funds, having people waiting to get access to data, or issues around confidentiality being argued back and forward with the seller. So that's important. A fourth one that I think really makes these things go well is allowing the team to collaborate. I can give an example, and I mean collaborate not just across the technical team, but across the technical, legal and financial teams. I can give an example of one where we looked at where, and is often the case, the tenement ownership of the company whereas it's clear that they had ownership of the tenements on which were being mined. As is often the case, tenements have changed hands many times over the years, and there's quite complex agreements involved with that. There'll be royalties associated with this tenement, or some sort of part ownership or trigger points, things that your legal counsel really have to go through and have a very detailed look at. We had one case where the legal team outside of our team were looking at these tenements, and the tenements bridged across, two different tenements bridged across the proposed shell of the mining pit. And the impact of that on the economics of the ultimate operation wouldn't be clear to the legal guys because it's not in their field, and they wouldn't have been aware how that was going to impact the technical side of what was happening. But to us, by grabbing that information from the lawyers and then modelling in to our financial model the impact of the royalties and the other arrangements in place and the potential triggers, because the triggers were if you got over a certain number of ounces, for instance, or if the grade was above this, you'd be amazed at some of the conditions that are in. And it impacted the ultimate financial gain that you could get from the company. So having the two teams work together like that is very important. The fifth point I'd mention that I think is pretty important is that even though we're talking about technical due diligence, it's most important to ensure that your team understand and are capable of tying back their findings to your business objective. Geologists are geologists. They love geology. Mining engineers love mining. That's all well and good, but at the end of the day, you're buying this thing to make $1. So it's important that your whole team understands the commercial objective of what they do and how it impacts on what you're trying to achieve. I mean, I know that I don't mean to sound disrespectful to the various professionals that are doing the job, but we've seen time and time again where people go off tangent about their issue being the most important issue, but you've got to see everything in context and pragmatically tie it back to the objective of what you're trying to do in looking at something. My sixth and final point for the buyer would be your emotions. And that is, on the one side, don't let your emotions get ahead of you. Keep a level head, listen to the team, understand everything in context, and don't think that you can make something work when clearly all of the data tells you it won't. But on the other hand, and this is where I talk about balance in emotions, to make something work, you've got to have fire in the belly. You've got to make it want to work, and this is where that opportunity comes in. If you know your team and you've got the energy to make something work, you quite often can make an asset work better in your hands as an MD than the previous people, because they've lost interest in what they're doing, and you can have a better focus and try to use that DD process to not just look at things that could go wrong. The reason why I said I don't like the fatal flaw type analogy, look at the things that can make it an opportunity and why it goes right, and how you can be the new kid on the block that really makes something work well, because you've used the DD process as an optimization process to understand how you can make the asset really work in your hands.
You've given the top 6 things that a buyer would have to be looking at when they're doing a due diligence, but what about sellers? What are some of the things you've seen where people are selling an asset and they may or may not have put themselves in a good light?
Well, the first one, and it's a procedural item, it seems simple, but in practice it takes a lot of effort, and that is getting that data room into good shape. Over the years, I've seen examples of some absolutely awful data rooms, where I'd use the word dross. In other words, a whole bunch of redundant and stupid documents thrown into a data room like the kitchen sink, multiple versions of budgets which conflict each other, mine plans that conflict each other, multiple versions of signed agreements, things like that. You never create a good impression that your company is well run and managed if the data room is like that. And I understand why some people have a focus on trying to do that. We come back to what I said before about this is about full disclosure. So you want to be careful about accidentally omitting documentation from your data room, but you also got to be careful about making sure the data that you've got in the room is the latest and greatest and the appropriate information. That data room is not so easy to get sorted out when all of a sudden, let's say you've had an unsolicited approach to sell the company. If you've never had a data room in the company, it's almost nigh on impossible, I'd say, to think you can get a data room up and running quickly and have it really well presented. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is you should consider, and of course this depends on the size of your company, whether you can afford this resource, but I would submit that even for a small company, to a greater or lesser degree, you should have this discipline, and that is have a data room on the go all the time. Have it just on your local server. Have it the structure all decided and laid out. Have all the documents there. Have it ready to go. If you're big enough that you can afford to have a document management person in your company or an admin person that runs that, obviously a person with enough technical and commercial understanding, they know what's material and what's not, and have that data room there live at all times. One benefit of having that data room available at all times is, when you get new board members come in or new executives in the team, it's a great tool to have as that, induction tool that you can throw at them and say, look, you want to learn about the company? Here you go. The data's sitting there. So, look, if you can afford it, if you can afford to have a document management person in the company to do that and manage that process, great. If you can't, then you have it as a part-time role for somebody to keep it going. When it comes to the time of running a transaction, then you can take the data from that data room and populate it up to one of these online data rooms that I've mentioned before. You probably don't want to keep the online data room running all the time unless your budget can afford it, because generally those online data rooms are charged on a time base, by the month. And if you're running that over a number of years, it might get beyond your budget. The second tip I'd have for sellers is a bit like the old analogy of when you sell a house, the most important thing is said is what the front garden or the front door looks like. And that is have a clear management presentation that guides the buyer and the DD team into your data room and into all the data that supports it. That clear management presentation should link your big picture as to why the company's great and links your strategy down to the operational activity. And when you're doing it, think about this one term, verifiable. You can create a great management presentation that's a sales document, sure, but if that sales document doesn't link down to the real facts of what's underneath the company, keep in mind that the people doing the DD on the buyer side are experienced professionals, and they're quickly going to see that you've got a version of altered truth out here in your management presentation and reality down there, and that can work against you. Spend the time to have that strategy that links through the whole process. It really can help. It's many examples I've seen where the data room is just a collection of information and people are left to their own devices to try to work out what's material and what's not. There's no roadmap to help them in. So see that management presentation as a great roadmap. The third item I'd like to mention for the seller is a subject that involves the life of mine schedule. The life of mine schedule in a mine, of course, is the schedule over the remaining life of the mine, not surprisingly, which shows you how the mineral inventory will be mined and scheduled such to ultimately create a cash flow, and that ultimately then defines what is the net present value of the business. So it's probably an underlying item that is the most important element to drive the value of an operating asset. This only, of course, applies to operating mines or operating assets, not exploration assets. The ASX, under Chapter 5 of the listing rules, has some specific rules around mining inventory and how you handle it, and people will be familiar with that. What I've seen as examples is that companies that are in operation, and I understand this because at the end of the day they're operating and they know their mines, so they are more focused on their budget and their short-term plans. They don't see the need for a long-term strategic mine plan as much as they might have, for instance, when they were trying to go to the bank to get finance to get the mine started. That's all well and good until the day comes that you come to sell a mine. We had an example once where the life of mine schedule was clearly just a one-year budget, and then I think a financial person or a CFO just projected the last month of the 1 year out for the remaining 10 years. And it's fair to say, obviously, that the DT team's quite a little bit ahead of that, and they're going to note that all of the things that potentially could be problems down the track, such that clearly grades are going to change, mining costs will change, particularly if it's underground mine, development's going to change, all the rest of it. You just want to have a strategic plan on the go at all times. So if you might not think it's important while you're in operation, but it's really important when you come to sell the company, because it's the number one thing that drives the ultimate value of what you're selling. And there's no good in just thumping the table and saying, well, this is what we do. Think of it from the point of view, and particularly from the point of view of somebody's having to do an independent valuation under what's known as the Valmin code. It'll never wash if they don't have a really detailed mine schedule. The final thing I'd say for the sellers, and I've been caught this way myself when I was selling a business. As a leader, know the detail of your business, and remember that the buck stops with you. Not only just if the deal fails, but the buck stops with you for things that you might not have known. I was selling this metals business once, and it was the one I mentioned earlier about the root and branch review done by the company. And I took the view when I came into the company that, as the new MD, that I was... I'd make sure that everything under my watch was done well, as we often do, and I knew every last detail and every contract we signed and all the rest of it. And some of the contracts that were entered into prior to my coming on board, I paid less attention to. Anyway, when these guys come to do the DD as the buyer, they unearthed this one contract which had consequential damages in it. And consequential damages, if you're not familiar with it, mean that you can have damages that have financial implications well beyond the contractual value of the contract, and that would be unacceptable to the buyer. So that would have given rise to us having to provide what a buyer would ask for. If something's not acceptable to buy, they're going to ask for a warranty. In other words, you warrant that this issue is going to remain with you, and we're not going to accept liability for that issue. Well, thankfully, we were able to go back in that case and get that particular contract, which was no longer valid anymore. We had it expired, and the deal proceeded without it being a problem. But my salutary tale in that one is that sometimes you don't think you need to follow even the detail of things that were before you were there, but it's worth getting the executives around you and everyone to make sure they get you right on top of every last detail, because you never know how it's going to get you. So it's really good to understand the detail of your business. Quite apart from that, when you're in the sales process, if you know the detail, boy, does it really give the buyer and the DD team a lot of confidence they're dealing with good operators.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark, for your stories and for your experience there. That was the final part of the 4-part series on due diligence. If you'd like to hear the previous episodes or any of the others from Fresh Thinking, head to optiro.com or head to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts to subscribe.